Welcome back everyone. In this video I'll be reviewing the line and line weight command that we covered in the previous video. Also, we're gonna draw a very basic geometry, so that's our mini project for this video, and in that we're gonna become familiar with different coordinate systems that are used in AutoCAD, primarily the Cartesian coordinate system versus the polar coordinate system. Also, we're going to input the coordinates in two different ways: absolute versus the relative coordinate system. And also we're going to become familiar with dynamic input. Okay, so first off, we need to know the difference between Cartesian and polar coordinate systems. In Cartesian coordinates, we always have an origin, an x and y axes, and in three-dimensional space we're going to have x, y, and z axes. So the intersection of these axes is your origin point. Okay. In Cartesian coordinates, the coordinates of a point is always with respect to origin, and the coordinates will be the x distance or the distance from the point to the origin along the x-axis. So that's going to be x comma y, and y is going to be the distance between from the point to the origin along the y-axis. The Cartesian coordinate of this point will be 12, 5. So 12 is along x-axis and 5 along y-axis. In polar coordinates, the coordinates are similar but different. So the coordinates will be in this way: the length, comma, the angle. In some softwares, we have the length of the line from the origin to the point, then with a smaller than the angle, and the angle is always measured with respect to positive direction of x-axis. So the polar coordinate of this point will be 13, comma 22.6. And again, in AutoCAD we don't use comma, so we do 13 less than 22.6 degrees, and you will see it when we actually go ahead and draw our basic geometry. Okay, so we're gonna turn on and off the dynamic input in AutoCAD, and I'll be demoing how to do that. So when dynamic input is on, and when you draw anything, you're gonna see these two inputs next to your cursor. But if you turn it off by clicking on this icon, you're gonna see there's no input entry next to your cursor on this space. Okay, and we're gonna use command bar for that. So in order to become familiar with what I just explained, we have one drawing, and we're gonna draw it in a couple different ways. So we're gonna start with using a Cartesian coordinate system, and the inputs will be absolute meaning that the coordinate of each point from 1 to 2, from 2 to 3. So when you do absolute coordinates, so the coordinate of 1 with respect to origin, coordinates of 2 with respect to the origin, and so forth. So when you keep drawing this geometry, the coordinate of the next point is always going to be with respect to the origin, and we call that the absolute coordinates. Okay, and of course this is Cartesian coordinate where you have xy origin, and the coordinate of the point 1, for instance, is 3, 1, and coordinate of point number 2 is with respect to the origin, it will be 7 along x and 1 along y, as you see here. Coordinate of number 3, point number 3, will be 7 along x and 2 along y-axis, so that'll be 7, 2, and so forth. In example 2, we're gonna use Cartesian coordinates, so it's not gonna be polar, it's Cartesian. So the units will be in this format, x comma y. However, we're gonna use relative coordinate input as opposed to the absolute coordinate. Okay, so in this example, the coordinate of point number 2 is not gonna be with respect to origin. Since we are using relative coordinate input, the coordinate of point 2 is going to be with respect to point 1, and coordinate of point 3 is going to be with respect to point 2, and so forth. In AutoCAD, we use this add sign to tell AutoCAD that we are our inputs is in relative coordinate. It's not in absolute coordinate. Okay, so we use this add sign for that. Of course, x comma y. So how many units we go along x, how many units we go along y. So for instance, from point 1 to point 2, as you see, there's add sign, go 4 along x, as you see here, and 0 along y. From point 2 to point 3, so there's add sign, 0 along x, and 1 unit along y. So as you see, from point 2 to point 3, there's no movement along x, but there is just 1 unit of movement along y-axis. From point 3 to 4, we're going to move negative 1 unit along x, so this is a positive x direction, and we're not going to move along y, so that's why it's at negative 1.0. And of course, from 4 to 5, it's going to be at 1, 1, right? So from 4 to 5. Let's move on to example number 3, where we're going to use polar coordinate system. So our entry is going to be the length of the line less than the angle of the line with respect to the positive x direction. Okay, so in this example, we're going to use polar coordinate as opposed to Cartesian coordinate, and the inputs are going to be in relative coordinates. Okay, and you see that sign for the relative coordinate. In this case, dynamic input is off as well. In the last example, we're going to turn on the dynamic input. When you do that, the coordinates will be relative. So when you turn on dynamic input, we input the coordinates in relatives, not in absolute. Okay, so it's so for instance, 0.7 coordinate will be always with respect to 0.6, and 0.8 coordinate that we input in these boxes will be with respect to 0.7, and so forth. But you can use either Cartesian or polar, depending on how you if you put after you enter the first space, if you press comma, it'll be in Cartesian. If you just press tab key, it'll accept the angle. Okay, we're gonna see the difference. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to the first example. Let's go back to AutoCAD. In the previous example, we talked about different things. I'm gonna go ahead and change the color a little bit. I'm gonna right click, go to options. Actually, let's go ahead and start off from a new template file. AutoCAD is going to use the NC standard with inch units. So I'm going to start off, press the middle key of the mouse and pan it. So that's your origin, 0, 0 point. Right click anywhere, click on options. Go to display tab. I'm going to change the color theme to dark. Also go to colors and the 2D model space, uniform background, change to white, apply, apply, and OK. So I changed the top here to dark and the 2D model space to white. I'm gonna check the grid spacing. So it's 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch. I'm gonna snap to grid. Let's turn it off. Keep it okay. So let's go back to the first example. Alright. Okay. So in this case, we're going to use Cartesian coordinates with absolute inputs, right? So our entries is going to be in this format. Let's go ahead and do that. Okay. So we're going to make sure the dynamic input is off by pressing on that icon. Click on line command. I'm going to open this a little bit so we can see the history. Our snap is off, as you see. You could turn it on to speed it up, but in the later projects we're going to use those functionalities. Okay, so let's go back. Okay, let's start from point 1. That's 3 along x and y along y axes. So specify first point. I'm going to use the command bar in this case. Type 3,1 and press enter. Okay, so each cube is 0.5 by 0.5, so total along x is 3 and along y axis is 1. Okay, so next let's go back to drawing. Since we're going to use Cartesian coordinate and absolute input, so the coordinate of 2 is going to be with respect to the origin, so that will be 7 along x and 1 along y axis, right? So let's type 7,1, right? Then coordinate of point 3 will be 7 along x and 2 along y axis with respect to origin, right? So so that'll be 7,2, six, 2, so the next one would be 7,3, 7,5, right? 6,5, 5,4. Next, 4,5. Next, 3,5. Next, 3,3. Next, let's look at this. So on my point 11, point 12 will be 4,2, right? 4,2, and then 3,2, and then 3,1. Press enter and press enter. So that's our geometry. Again, we were talking about line weight in the previous video. I'm gonna go ahead and I have just one layer. Everything is drawn in one layer. That's called layer 0. And in the properties, everything is set up by layer, and that's the way I like it. So when I go to layer properties, find my layer and click on the line weight. Let's change the line weight to 0.3 mm and X out. Make sure you click on this icon to show the line weight. Okay, so that's example 1. I'm gonna go ahead and click on move. You can select it one by one, or you can just click here, release your mouse, and then select everything. When you're done selecting, press enter. Grab somewhere, it's really not important. I'm gonna grab this corner, and you can move it along X direction. Let's just press 15. Okay, so let's move it there. We're gonna redraw it, but with a different method. Example number 2, we're gonna use CC as Cartesian coordinate system. However, using relative inputs, relative entries. So coordinate of 2 with respect to 1, coordinate of 3 with respect to 2. We're going to use add sign. Okay, let's go ahead and do that. I'm gonna go ahead and close this drawing so that it doesn't confuse us. Okay, so let's go ahead and grab line command. We are in this layer. First coordinate will be with respect to the origin, 3, 1, right? But we're gonna use relative, and for that, click on the command line and shift 2. That'll give you the add sign 4 along X and 0 along Y axis. Okay. Then add sign 0 along X axis, comma 1 along Y axis. Right. 4 comma 0 from 1 to 2, and from point 2 to 3. The coordinate of point 3 with respect to 2 is 0, 1. So 0 along x-axis and 1 along y-axis. So we're gonna go ahead and speed this up a little bit. So from point 3 to 4 would be -1, 0. And we need the add sign, -1, 0. And add sign 1, 1, right? Add sign 0, 2, 0 along x, 2 along y axis, as you see. Again, each square that you see on the grid is ½ inch, so 4 of them will be 2 inches. So add sign -1 along y axis and 0 along, -1 along x axis and 0 along y axis. Add sign -1 along y axis and -1 along x and -1 along y axis. Okay. Add sign -1 along x axis and +1 along y axis. Add sign -1 along x axis and 0 along y axis. Add sign 0 along x axis and -2 along y axis. So the next one, let's look at this. So it's going to be +1 along x axis and -1 along y axis. So add sign 1, -1. Add sign -1, 0. And you can simply select that and escape. Okay, so that's the same geometry, but we use relative coordinates. Okay, we're gonna move on to example number 3, where we're gonna use polar coordinate as opposed to the Cartesian coordinate. So in polar, we're gonna put the length of the line and the angle with respect to the positive x direction using this format. So again, we're gonna try to select this object. When you're done, press enter and select somewhere on the screen. Let's move this along y-axis. Let's move it 7 units up. Okay. Now grab line command from 3, 1, as you see. I put down here, press enter. For polar coordinates, as I mentioned, let's do add sign, so it's going to be relative. The length of the line would be 4 units less than 0 degree. So it's not less than, but it's a symbol to define the angle with respect to positive x direction. So press enter. As you see, we define the length and the angle. So let's go ahead, add sign, so it's relative. So previous point, the length is 1 and the angle is 90 degrees with respect to positive x direction. Okay, add sign again, length is 1, angle is 180 degrees with respect to positive x direction. That's in this direction, right, to the right side. For next one, we are not gonna use polar because we are not sure about the length. The length is the square root of 2. That's not gonna be very accurate if I enter it. So I'll be using relative, but in Cartesian coordinates. So add sign 1, 1, right? It's very accurate that way. Then we're going to continue with polar. Add sign 2 is going to be the length and the angle will be 90 degrees. And we're going to speed it up a little bit. Add sign, then length is 1, the angle is 180. Again, here we are not going to use polar, we're going to use Cartesian coordinate and also relative input. So that'll be -1, -1. Add sign again in Cartesian coordinate, -1, +1. So that's in Cartesian coordinate. Then we're gonna switch back to polar. 1 is the length, angle 180. Sorry, that didn't work because I didn't put the add sign there, so I need to undo it. You can just press U. That's a highlighted character, highlighted letter. Press enter. Let's try that again. We're gonna do the add sign. Length is 1, angle is 180. And again, add sign, length is 2. The angle is, you can do the angle 270 or -90. Either one should work. Let's do a -90. Then for this one, we're gonna use Cartesian coordinate again. So add sign 1, -1, right? We're gonna use polar now. Add sign, length is 1, angle is 180, and then just click right there and escape. So that's method number 3, how we can draw this in polar coordinate and with relative inputs. But this was we use a hybrid method here. We use Cartesian for these inclined lines and we use polar coordinate for the straight lines. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and move this. Press enter. I can, it doesn't matter, I'm just going to click here and move it up there. So in the last example number 4, we're going to turn on dynamic input. As you see on this side of the screen, next to the cursor, you're going to have some entry spaces. Okay, when dynamic input is on, coordinates will be in relative. Okay, so they are not going to be with respect to origin. They will be with respect to the previous point. But you can use the Cartesian or polar coordinate system. So you can enter in this format, x, y. Just put the first value x, then press comma, and then type the y dimension, right? So in relative. But also you can do in polar. So put the length of the line, then with the tab key you can switch to the next space and type the angle. So for polar coordinate, just type the length, press the tab key, and enter the angle. If you want to use Cartesian coordinate, for instance, in these areas for inclined lines, you can do along x-axis in relative entry, and then press comma, then enter the length along y-axis, right? So let's go ahead to AutoCAD and turn on the dynamic input. So we're gonna grab line command, type 3,1. That's the start point. But we're gonna turn on the dynamic input, okay, by pressing on this icon. As you see next to the cursor, you have some entry, right? So if you type 4, then with tab key you can enter the angle 0. Press enter. So that's the first line from point 1 to point 2. We're gonna use so that's polar, right? So length 1, tab key, that's the angle 90 degrees, right? Again, length is 1, press tab key, angle 180 degrees. Okay, for next one we're gonna use Cartesian coordinates. So we're gonna do 1, 1. Alright, so we use dynamic input with Cartesian coordinate with relative coordinate entry. Next we're going to use polar, so that will be length will be 2. Press tab key to enter the angle. That will be 90 degrees. Next we're gonna do so the length will be 1, the angle 180 degrees. Then we're gonna use Cartesian coordinate here. So that will be -1, -1, right? So we're gonna do Cartesian here as well. -1, +1. And here we're gonna use polar. So length is 1, tab key for the angle 180 degrees, right? So in this case, let's go ahead and use Cartesian coordinates. So 0 along x, -2 along y-axis, right? So that worked well for us. Let's go ahead and do Cartesian here. 1 along x-axis, -1 along y-axis. So in this case we're gonna do -1 along x-axis, 0 along y-axis, and you can click the first point and escape. So in this example I showed you 4 methods of drawing the same geometry with dynamic input off versus on, as well as using Cartesian coordinate versus polar coordinates, as well as using relative versus absolute coordinate entries. I hope you enjoyed this video. In the later videos we're gonna be moving into more advanced type of geometries. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like this video and subscribe to the channel to support this channel. Thank you.